So I'm going to present our talk now, this is still very much a work in progress study, mainly just because of the size of the corpus, and you'll see it later what it can give for the project team, and also how actually what things we have found so far in this study. The messily parallel Bible corpus, which is used in this study, is just one of the types of the parallel corpora, which is a good case for language comparison, because just parallel texts ideally, per definition, embed identical semantic components, including grammatical semantics. So this is, of course, very much dependent on the quality of translation, but still it's a solution for the problem of linguistic comparability. Linguistic typology and linguistic diversity, of course, require messily parallel text if we want to conduct some typological studies, just because of the requirement on representativity. So the best existing candidate for that is, of course, the Bible corpus, just because this text has been translated into so many languages. So here we use the messily parallel text compiled by several persons and presented by Cecil and Meyer. Unfortunately, not anymore available at their website, but thanks for the persons who gave us access to the data. So the Bible corpus has been already used in various typological studies. So one of the, a couple of the first most prominent ones, it seems, were works on the domain of motion. So the first study focused on local phrase markers. So where or from where you go, for instance, and motion predicates, so the verbs themselves. These were still very relatively small samples, so 153 or 100 languages, and only one gospel was used there. So basically, the methodology was to take an English text, for instance, or comparatively several more, and choose the context with motion situation. Then you manually annotate data for each language in your sample. So you annotate for the marker or the verb used in this context. Then you build distance matrices, and from that probabilistic semantic maps, and then you try to interpret the clusters. So this is how the data look for French, for instance, where after mapping all the context in the semantic space, you see that some various verbs of motion correlate with different clusters, and so we could probably interpret them as the cluster of come, cluster of go, cluster of transport, and so on. There have been also several studies focusing on spectral categories, perfects and yamatives. First of all, so yamative is the gram with the meaning already, more or less, and also progressives. So this is, of course, the difference of all these studies from the caritive markers, because caritives are not that prominent in the text, and also not that studied. So it's, of course, the very important difference. So in this case, the authors mainly used the word-aligned version of the corpus, so made actually by Robert Osling from Stockholm University. And usually it's an English text which shows as a starting point, so that you project all the word annotations to other not corporate texts. And in these cases, there were already massive samples, or probably in the work Wafeyan, it was a smaller sample, but still this has already expanded, and the procedure is a little bit different here. So you use a certain seed gram, so you know that this marker has a certain function, and then you calculate the similarity of other potential streams in other languages, and try to filter them out as best candidates. And then only after you have chosen the candidates, then you can somehow cluster the results and see what happens. So in our case, the sample consists of almost 1,700 doculates. So the doculate is just a translation, a certain translation. So there are fewer languages in the sample, but still over 1,200. And the map with the languages from this sample looks like this. So the funny thing is that the languages of Russia still are somehow underrepresented in the data. So I hope that in the nearest future, I will probably fix this by adding more text, because, well, there is a universal format how you annotate the text so that they can then automatically be compared by verses. And for this study, we just used the already available script written by Robert Dostling. So he wrote the program which allows to look for the candidate markers by using certain seed grams. So if you use several seed grams, you look for the generalized distributions of generalized distribution of all of them, and then you can also specify some parameters. So in this case, we look for words, bigrams, and subsequences, so all of these types among the candidates, and for the best 10 candidates. And love is the code for Latvian. This is just what we're looking for. So originally we had 6 seed gram with a bias towards Indo-European. So this was inspired by the project team by the moment when we started doing this. So these are the markers we used, but also in addition, we checked the results scrolled by only English without, only by Spanish scene. Manual checking of the results interestingly shows that seen as a certain seed marker gives better results and better interpretability. So what can happen? So probably there is much variability among English translation, which gives more variability in the data and probably lower likelihood scores or probabilities than interpreted as scores. For instance, scene can be used in various functions of Caritive. So the prototypical one, when we have in these 3 languages, all of them have Caritive markers. The circumstance Caritive, or these adjunct adverbial Caritive, like without fear. Or also interestingly, attributive Caritives in Spanish are expressed also by this separate marker. And this is, again, a circumstance Caritive, but already with the absence of a concomitant situations. Here it's interesting because the subjects of these situations are non-referential. So what are the results so far? So first of all, we got our best Caritive context. So these required some extension of the available scripts, with the which returns the tables with the columns of the languages of the sum sample for our better interpretability. So the birth ID, the number of the languages where this birth has a Caritive marker in at least 1 doculect. So if we had 6 languages, then in all, if we get in a Caritive marker at least once all of them, then we'll get 6 here. So then the number of all doculects that have a particular Caritive marker in this verse, so it was 52 for this particular verse, and the overall number of doculects that have this verse. So there were 3 verses in 3 doculects, not 3 verses, but in 3 doculects, this verse had no Caritive marker. And then we calculate the ratio as the coefficient of Caritivity for a particular context. So interestingly, why do I need these 3 intermediate columns. Is just that imagine that we only have one verse in only one language and only one doculect, and still we can get a high coefficient, but we can ignore it if we just look at these columns. So we compiled 2 top lists. So the top 26 contexts with the Caritive marker in all our 6 languages. So that was of 55, I think, doculects over the threshold of 0.5. So this was an arbitrary choice, but it was like finding a certain option. And of course, you can look at the lower context if you want, but then to decide whether you want to have them or not. And then 37 additional contexts for at least 5 languages. And this makes some sense because for some languages in the sample, there's only New Testament part available, for instance, or even a smaller part of it. So the difference from the okay, here we have the difference from what the project team did, because we had more documents to choose from actually, and we also had a wider contextual space. So there were more books than just New Testament, because that was the project and what the project team did. And also we could check the difference in the markers. But this is actually what we didn't focus that much here. So we could also add some morphemes like less and get a more limited space of context, for instance, but we can redefine the procedure if needed. So this is what the top 5 of this best Caritive context looks like. So a very typical Caritive function. So the companion or the circumstances, and also the possession, right? And this is what we get in these top list for 5 languages. So some relevant Old Testament contexts are still very interesting. So like едят ли безвкусное без соли, with even 2 relevant markers, or the clauses or something relevant for the questioner, I think. And then the second part was looking for top candidates for Caritive markers. So as I have already mentioned, part of this was that, well, we looked for the candidates of our seed markers. The problem was that if you use 6 markers, then we get the distribution is skewed towards very specific allocations, specific for the Bible. So there are some things like without fault. So in Russian, they are even translated like непорочные, for instance, or without sheep, because there are many verses, I think, in Old Testament mentioning this. Someone was with some rules as usual for Old Testament. And this is why we crawled also the list for without and sin, because they sort of neutralized this a little bit. So this is how these looked for the Portuguese translation by 6 languages. So actually here we have this defeito and cordeiro, just because defeito is this fault, so like without fault, without any fault, and cordeiro is this sheep, as far as I remember. So then we chose the top candidates from our list. So the lists are actually available, at least in the Slack channel, if you want to have a look at them. So they look like this, actually. So we chose those that have scores over 1. Well, originally we chose those that had 50, but I'll show the map here, which sort of shows that we have some markers with candidates with the scores over 100, And we also have different strata here, I don't know, within some intervals. And this is very arbitrary, and this is still requires manual inspection. But what I can tell you is that several hundred is a very, very trustful score. So most of our European languages with these dedicated Caritive markers will have it. Then this is what you see on this map. So probably it gives more, it adds more to the map that Sonia showed, because here we have more languages of Africa. See, still we have some blue markers here, so apparently something that looks like Caritive markers. And actually these are, there are verbs meaning to lack in many African languages, which are used like that. So now the main part is...
Sorry, 5 minutes left.
Yeah, okay. Then this is the final part, the discussion of what we actually got, of what we can get from such data. Is it's like if we look at the questionnaire, for instance, so that's like we can't really get much information of morphophonological properties because we extract candidates separately as separate strings. We can get semantic properties only indirectly from the context, and syntactic properties also very hard because we usually get the marker itself and not the properties of absentee, for instance, or anything that is syntactically related. So for morphophonology, it works a little bit if we look at the list, but then it's either manual inspection or some sort of string similarity measures that can help. Because, for instance, yeah, this is Bantu language where we get all this rich morphology extracted and it calculates the similarity in some way. So we see that there is this root with some variation, and we probably can get something from that. As for semantics, it's yeah, all the information we can get will come from the context. So after additional inspection, and it's we are looking forward to annotating most typical character context, probably with the team, the project team, so that then probably something can be also done semi-automatically, probably. To see in which context with which semantics we get some particular character markers or the candidates. This shows how we can get some information for compatibility, because these were some features, I think, from the questionnaire, using the usage with pronouns, personal pronouns, and something else. So we have a clear advantage here because there are more languages, longer text for some of them, so it can give more data for the project. And then the interesting thing is this grammatical semantics. So what are marker properties, whether they are dedicated, whether they are polysemous or something. So like polysemous with several different negators, or maybe something else like to lack as a lexicalized root. So how to do this? Actually, I checked the reverse procedure, so that you use the obtained candidate as a seed marker for certain languages where you can find out something diagnostically. So for instance, look at the candidate in these diagnostic languages and then try to figure out what it is more like, what is its function. So as Lithuanian, for instance, more or less distinguishes negative copula and negative possessive verb. So this will be a different string candidate. Of course, this is also can vary because of the translational variability, but still. For instance, in Apu, in Miskito had these things, so that we got only negative copula, negative verb to be, but not the negative have. So apparently this coincides with what the project team found out about this. As for negative possessive, then you get the this neturi in Lithuanian, for instance, as an additional candidate. In many languages, we use negative existential, so in kind of functions which are correspond to negative possessive. So in Lithuanian, you will get both then. And there are still no standard negators in the top list. So we see this is not a standard negator. This is some other type of negator. Then there are many languages which give the vague, very vague negative elements. So when I try to check this language, so I got a range of negative polarity elements. So like ni in Russian, I don't know, nobody, and also character markers and something like bot actually. So yeah, a couple of more minutes, right?
Yeah, we are practically out of time, but you can take a few minutes from the questions.
I see.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. So this is how it looks like for several languages: Russian, Sami, Lithuanian. And yeah, in the dictionary it says that it's non ce n'est pas cela sans. So these kind of elements. So this is just a very similar example. So if you will check the slides, you'll see this. And the standard negation is a little bit tricky, but then you get a Russian "не," for instance, with very high scores, like over 1,000 was here. And this was the case with Vietnamese Hon. And this is almost the last part. So the only problem is that you don't really know sometimes whether the marker is dedicated and or like the semantic function it has what really happened, because the Welsh preposition, for instance, is also used in negative perfects now, and then it's a little bit tricky because the direction was the different one. And this is our last main slide. So the problems are that allomorphy is a problem because we can extract allomorphs separately but not identify them as the same element. Discontinuous markers, of course, are the problem because we extract only consecutive strings. Then collocational attraction skews the distribution. Then homonymy, of course, because we look only for strings. We don't know what other meanings they can have, these strings can have. Then it's hard to classify some non-dedicated markers which get special morphology. So they sort of look special, but probably they are not really special. So I think this is a tricky case for the whole team, probably. And also the quality of the corpus is still the important issue because there are many problems there with the quality of translation, variability, alignment, and also non-normalization problem. Yeah. Sorry, someone has a micro on. Okay, so I will stop here, but the bonus case study is just for your information because we looked at some Creole and conlangs conlangs and find out some interesting thing. And then there is a second theme for Turkic, which just shows how the markers are crawled for Turkic and the distribution over several sub-branches of Turkic. So that's all for now. Thank you for your attention, and you're welcome to ask me about anything.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Questions? Anybody can raise your hands or write the word question in the chat, please.
Well, I have some probably. Do you think that the data really reflect something else apart from translation of the Bible? Because from my experience, the language of Bible is sometimes differ very much from the real language. Like in San Maka, I studied the certain constructions and I found out the Bible made completely different results from the apart from the text, ordinary text. So like what you showed about this "не" in Russian, that is very often, but probably it is only in the Bible translation and not would be not the same for just Russian language?
Yes, of course, this is definitely the problem, but this is why we use this notion, the doculect. So it's the language of the translation. It's not necessarily the language itself, but it's also like if you check some typological data, it's also not clear sometimes what dialect is used. So other sources of data can also be tricky. So this is, I think, always the problem. So this is definitely still useful for those cases where you really have no access to any source of data.
Yeah.
And still it can be complementary to some things. So I think for showing that some markers are used in semantic functions, well, actually for those languages which are in the projective sample, so we can really validate or against what the people find out from other sources and what is found in the Bible. So of course, this is always the problem, and this is tricky, but this is the best we can do, probably, with this data.
And do you know that the second most translated book is the Le Petit Prince, the Little Prince, that is translated, of course, not so to so many languages as Bible, but it is the mostly translated book that is not so well. Probably it reflects more the
But it's short. But it's short, so you'll probably not get many contexts. Yes. And it has much worse representativity, actually, across genre, across continents, and so on. Any more questions?
Yes, Sonia has one question.
Yeah, thank you. Well, actually, I have two very little questions. One question is about non-dedicated constructions. You mentioned on the slide that the last option is to express it with verbs like to lack. I don't know whether you remember what languages have it, or you can refer to some documents where I can find
African languages.
Okay.
Yeah, so that was African and something in Austronesian, something like Oceania, I think.
Okay.
So I think Samoan probably, but I think, yeah, this is what we would check additionally, and this is what I'm going to do actually, to compile the table with all the interpretation. So they are not 100% sure, but yeah, this is the best we can do again, or check against other sources, but yeah. Yes.
Yeah, thank you. Because
I think I'll share this data.
This way of expression seems to be very rare, at least in our database. So it would be interesting to
Yes.
And another very stupid question about compatibility with different word classes. Did you make it somehow automatically? Or did you just look through the examples and see whether it
you mean this?
Yeah, this.
You mean no, that was not automatically. That was just because I have looked at the context and tried to understand what's going on there.
Okay.
Well, in fact, it can be done easily with partly all this automatically annotated corpus, but then it depends. Then the open question is how much you trust such annotation. Then it's more noise. So here, here at least the context without Christ is good, because you can usually identify the string for Christ in many languages, and at least in the Latin script. So, for instance.
Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Natalia. We can. And let's introduce the next speaker.
Sorry.
You can. Oh, yes. There is a small question, a very, very small question, Maxime.
I will try to be very short. Sorry, I just wanted to ask Natasha if the lists that you gained were close, or if you compared it to the one we made manually for the Bible.
Yeah, they were close, but there are also some differences because I mean you had a fewer number of languages and you also had narrow space because you used only 4 gospels and
Yeah,
I used the whole New Testament. Yeah. But we can compare it after the conference and go on with the project towards some results. Yeah.